Welcome to the video for the key hook design assignment. In this video, we will assume that you have already viewed the 9-minute Introduction to TinkerCAD video that was assigned earlier. We will demonstrate some of the features of TinkerCAD, just help you acquire some basic skills that will work up to a more complicated assignment. Let's begin by creating our object. Click on Create and 3D Design, and we see that TinkerCAD always gives a really weird name to your project. This one's called a Brave Hobby Volt. Let's change that not very descriptive name to Key Hook Design. Oh, look, I've already done this before. Key Hook Design Assignment. All right, now let's begin by creating the base that will be attached to the wall using a medium-size 3M command strip. Let's grab a round roof, pull it over onto the work plane using the left mouse button. You can zoom in TinkerCAD using the mouse scroll wheel, and you can move the object side to side and back and forth. By pressing down on the scroll wheel, there's a switch embedded underneath the scroll wheel, so it's both a wheel and a switch. Just press and hold and move it around any way you like. Then you can rotate the build plane using your right-hand mouse button. So that's good to know. Okay, so let's change the dimensions of this to match the medium-sized 3M command strip that we're going to use to mount it. We will make it 18 millimeters wide and 55 millimeters long. So by shaping our objects numerically, by changing the size of things, this is the basis of parametric design. And that is one class of design that characterizes, in particular, TinkerCAD as a parametric design tool. So let's make this 4 millimeters high. And now we have our base. Now it has kind of sharp edges here on the sides. I would like to soften them a little bit. So let's take a negative cylinder and pull it over onto the build plane. And I want to flip it over on its side. So we need to view it along the y-axis, and you see that we have rotational curves here. Let's rotate it around the y-axis. And I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. And now we see that it is resting on the build plane. Sometimes when you rotate things, they will wind up on the build plane, or they may end up intersecting the build plane or hovering above it. In any case, you can select the object. You see this is selected, and press the letter D on your keyboard, and it will drop it down to the build plane. Now we need 2 of these horizontal negative cylinders, so it's already selected. I'm going to hit Control C and Control V. Now we have 2 of them. And let's view our base from the side. And we'll put one of these cylinders on one end and one of these cylinders on the other. Let's back up a little bit. Let's use the navigation cube to take a look at the right-hand side of the cylinder and go to an orthographic, switch to a orthographic view. Now we can see exactly how much the negative cylinders are intersecting with our base. And you can use your arrow keys to move them in and out like this. And you can use these negative cylinders to shape your object. Now, did it intersect the way we want it? Not completely. Look, see how this is does not line up properly? Let's move this a little bit to the left. Let's move this cylinder to the left. The other one looks all right. Now let's group them. Grouping is a very important tool in TinkerCAD. We'll select all 3 objects, and we're going to click on Group, and the negative is combined with the positive, and we find that we've chopped away some of the unwanted parts. So now we have a little bit of a chamfer on each end. Just makes it, I don't know, more attractive. More importantly, we got to play with negative objects. So let's just scoot that aside and bring in a cylinder to make our hook. So we see that this cylinder is 20 by 20 millimeters, and it's 20 millimeters high. It's a little bit fat to be a key hook. So let's make it 8 millimeters wide and 10 millimeters deep along the y-axis. This is the x-axis, this is the y-axis, and on the z-axis it's 20 millimeters. That's fine. So it's a little bit sharp on top, just sort of an unpleasant sharp edge. So let's put a rounded top on it. Let's bring over a paraboloid, and let's make the paraboloid 4 millimeters high. Now it's a squished paraboloid, and we'll just match these dimensions. We'll make it 10 millimeters on the y-axis and 8 millimeters on the x-axis. And now it perfectly matches the size and shape of our vertical hook. So let's just pick it up and drop it on top of the vertical hook. So we know the vertical hook is 20 millimeters high. How do we get this 20 millimeters up off the build plane? There's several ways to do it. You can, let's just zoom in a bit so we can see better. You can grab onto the elevation arrow and just drag it up and down like this. And you see how even if it's below the build plane, it simply shows it's 11 millimeters below the build plane or 19 millimeters above. And you can try to set it to 20 millimeters. Another way is to hold down the Control key and simply elevate it with the number of clicks. The distance traveled with each click is determined by the snap grid. You can move in increments all the way down to 0.1 millimeter or just as fine as the resolution of your device. Or, alternatively, now let's just drop that down on the build plane. I'll press the letter D. Alternatively, you can scoot it up a little bit, and we see that we have a height measurement, and we'll just type in 20 millimeters. So now it's 20 millimeters high. Now how do we line it up with the rest of the hook? So we could scoot it over and just try to line it up, and sometimes that will work. But to save time and to do it the easy way, let's use the Align tool. The Align tool is so handy that it will become one of your most used tools in TinkerCAD. And you use the Align tool by selecting both objects and clicking on the Align tool. And you see that we have selection circles for the z-axis and the x and y-axis. So let's center these two pieces together on both the x and y-axis. And now our hook has a nice little rounded cap. And we will select them both together and group them. All right, there's our rounded cap. Now, for our keys to hang on to the hook, we'd like a little notch in here. So let's bring in a cylinder and flip it on its side. And remember how we did that? We used the degree markers. We'll just flip it 90 degrees. And let's squish it a bit. Let's make it just 10 millimeters high. So now we have a little bit sharper notch. And now let's raise it up so that it's about half of the height of the hook, or a little bit more. So I'm going to hold the Control key and just press the arrow key several times. All right, now how much is it intersecting? I'm going to select the hook and change this to transparent. That is not the same as making it negative. Now we can see how much it's intersecting. We also see that maybe that's a little high. We'll drop that down just a bit, bring it in a little more. Now we've created a nice little notch for your key ring to hang on. So I'm going to select both of them and group them, and there's our hook. Now we're going to take our hook and center it in the lower end of the base, and you can try to center it. Well, it just doesn't seem to want to center. So what tool should we use? Our good friend, the alignment tool. And let's center it along the x-axis. We already have it where we want it on the y-axis. So we'll select both of them and group them. And essentially we have our key hook here with one little problem. And that problem is that this is a weak spot in the key hook. Remember, this object does not really, when they're merged like this object does not really go all the way through the base. So if you put any weight on it at all, say if your keys have a bunch of extra stuff, it might snap off right here. So we're going to strengthen it, and again, this is part of the learning exercise, by putting a steel pin right down through the middle of it to make it strong. So let's bring in a negative cylinder. And remember, you can take any object and make it negative or positive. You can use it to remove material. There, that's negative, that's positive. Just absolutely any object can be either negative or positive. So the steel pin we're going to put in has a diameter of let's say 2.75 millimeters, and let's match that on the x-axis, 2.75. Now we can hide the steel pin entirely. Let's make the base transparent so we can see how everything is lining up. And move the steel pin over, and we're moving in 1 millimeter increments. We maybe want to move in smaller increments. Let's switch down to 1/10 of a millimeter increments. I'll have to select the hole, and we'll just move that over until it centers the way we want it. We don't want it to intersect with our notch. Or if you like, you can simply select both objects and then use the alignment tool. And then you can group them. Now as we look at our hook, we see that we have a hole that passes all the way through. Even without a steel pin, this will strengthen the hook, because now that hole will have printed walls around it, which will serve to strengthen it just a little bit. But we're going to drop a steel pin through it. We have steel pins available in the lab. If you're working on this remotely, a piece of coat hanger wire will work usually. If necessary, you can modify the diameter of the hole to match the steel pin that you have. I'll post a separate video on how to cut steel pins to use to reinforce critical parts of your 3D designs. Okay, this is a finished piece. This is ready to print. All we have to do is export it, slice it up in Cura, and print it. Welcome to the bonus section on inserting the reinforcing steel pin. We made the hole for the pin 2.75 millimeters in diameter in the design, but we're going to fit a 2 millimeter steel pin into the hole. Why did we use such a large figure? Because when you're FDM printing a hole, that is, the smaller it gets, the more some inaccuracy tends to creep in, usually in the form of making a hole smaller than what was designed. Also, we need a little bit of room for the glue. So we made the hole 20 millimeters deep, and we're using an 18 millimeter pin. Now I've just cleared out the hole a little bit with a piece of pin stock and verified that it has at least 18 millimeters of room for our pin. So let's use some super glue. Let's handle that super glue as if it is dangerous, because it is. If it gets on your hands, it can cause a skin injury. If it gets into your eye, it's much more serious. So what we're going to do after each stage is wipe up any excess super glue with a dry cloth. We'll begin by wiping off the end of the super glue nozzle. We're handling this very gently and not squeezing very hard. We don't want extra super glue around. Don't over tighten the lid, just make it snug. Now let's insert the pin a little bit and push it in with a metal object, and we'll miss, and we'll try again. There, it went in. Use the corner of the screwdriver. Now let's take our cloth and wipe up the excess super glue. Now we'll wipe off the screwdriver. And now the most important part, wipe off your hands with that dry cloth to make sure that there's no super glue on your hands. Now this hook has been reinforced and it won't break.